and welcome back to the Pragmatic Product Chat Series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. Before we hop into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that if you are enjoying listening to this show, and I hope you are, and that's why you're here, there's two ways you could help out. One, you could do a review on online, anywhere that you guys listen to your podcast. If you do a review, it just helps other people find the show. Or if you want to take the super direct way to helping other people find the show, you can send someone an episode. Be like, oh man, Bob, I was listening to this episode and it made me think of you. Maybe, in fact, today's episode will be one that you want to share, because today we are talking about how do we help teams align? How do we make sure that everyone's on the same page? And how do we kind of take the chaos of meetings and bring it down? And we have a very, very special guest joining us today to help us do that. His name is Christoph Steinlehner. He has a robust background in product management and design. And he kind of uses that combination to help product managers and leaders as a product coach and consultant. He works with everything from scale-ups to enterprise organizations as they grapple with the challenges of deciding where to focus to create innovative products. And he brings some really interesting tools to those discussions. So welcome, Christoph.
Thank you, Rebecca. Really great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It's really great to be on the show, and I'm can't wait to tell more about like the chaos in meetings I saw and how to get to more sanity again.
Yes. Oh, chaos in meetings. There's not a listener listening who's not going to be like, oh, I totally relate to both. Oh, there's a lot of meetings, and boy, are they often chaotic and not as helpful. But before we dive in there, tell us, I like to have everyone's kind of start with your origin story, right? How did you get where you are today, and why are you so passionate about what you do?
Yeah, so as many people in product, I have like a little bit of a longer, winding story. So as you hear from my accent, I'm German, but I'm currently in the US. And I started out like as a web designer and developer. And then like right after school, no degree, no nothing. And then I got into getting a degree in multimedia production and getting a degree in interaction design. So my background is really in design, but through this journey, I went to working with product companies and then moved at some point to being in a product management role, and then went on to product leadership roles. And at some point, I did this for some time in interim roles, consulting roles, and now I'm in a coaching mode. So working with individuals, but also with teams and organizations to improve their practices.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit first. You obviously have not only worked in a variety of companies, but now you work with a variety of companies in your roles. What are some of like the pain points that you like, the consistent pain points that you see within teams?
Yeah. So for me, one of the biggest pain points is getting even on the same page. So we have a lot of different roles. We have like especially in product, we have like many different stakeholders around us, but we also partner up with engineers pretty closely. We also partner up with designers. And of course, we have like a leadership who is expecting something like that from us. And oftentimes it's like hard to be even clear in what is the actual goal and what is like in everybody's minds, because we are sitting in meetings and we're talking to each other. And we pretty quickly go into rabbit holes. So you have an engineer is like, this database thing, you have to do this and that and so on. And you're like, okay, but that's not really interesting. But somebody else is like, that's really interesting. Let's talk more about that. So this is what usually happens. And then oftentimes I see that like the end of the meeting is like, okay, now we have to schedule the next meeting because we don't know what to do next. So that's for me a huge pain point I see again and again, independent of the industry or the situation.
So there's a lot of rabbit holes and conversations, but at the end of the day, you have to meet again because you don't have is progress.
Exactly.
Right? Which is the opposite of the goal of the meeting. So when we talk about like that, right? And the sort of, as you said, kind of getting everyone on the same page and aligning. I think this is one of the really interesting things where you bring some of that designer background into how you teach and consult and work on getting that alignment. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I can talk a little bit like how I, for myself, found this. So I was in a project working with like a mid-sized company, and they moved their business model from like one-time purchases to subscriptions, bundles, and things like that.
The dream for every company, right?
Exactly. Everybody wants to go there. And the interesting thing, like marketing and sales came up with this plan. They were like, yeah, that's easy to do. We already selling this stuff. We just need to, like, you tech teams implement this. And I was tasked, like, with a small group to make this happen as a lead through like 10 or so teams. It wasn't even clear who needs to be involved. So I jumped from team to team and like talked to the product managers there and engineers there, and was like, okay, what do we need to do? And it was chaos, because like nobody really knew. Everybody had like their thing in the mind. They didn't know where this data is coming from. They didn't know like what dependencies there are, and so on and so on. And while doing this, so since I have a design background, I mapped. So I created a service blueprint. I worked through the through the user journey, did step by step, and took my notes. So, okay, this system is involved, this team is responsible for that, and so on and so on. So this thing grew, but I didn't show it to anybody, because it was like, I'm like a designer, nobody will get this. It's like the thing I use for my notes, but it's not interesting. But after some time, like this thing slipped into meetings. I was just like opening it up and was like, okay, I think, is this correct? I understood that. And people were like, oh, that's quite interesting, because you have something in there which I wasn't aware of. So I brought this artifact like more and more into my meetings. And suddenly people started to like work with this thing. And it was like clear what my expectations and my questions were. And it was clear what information is already there and what information is missing. So where like obvious gaps where the group I currently talk to didn't have answers, or we had like a lot of assumptions, but didn't know like, okay, we have to test here, we have to check back with customers, we have to check back with somebody technical, somebody from sales, or another person. And that was for me really the breakthrough, bringing this artifact to a bigger group, but also into one-on-one discussions, because this thing worked like also for them in their meetings. When they talked about this topic, they could also like reference this, and everybody like after a couple of conversations had this model in their head, and everybody was running around with the same model in their head. And that's different to what has been before, and also what I see in my current work, that everybody has like a different model in there.
Yeah.
Everybody's thinking like, oh, it's about this and this is important. And nobody's aligned on, okay, what's important? What are the big questions? What are the things we should discuss now? And what are the things we can park for now because they are just not that relevant at this moment?
Well, I think that's super interesting, right? Where what it allows you to do is see the process. And I think there's a couple of things. There's the things that are already established that we often in meetings still go over, right? Because we forget there's someone in that meeting who's like the project leader, who's breathing this project 100% of the time, and they don't forget anything. Right? But the rest of us pop in and out of that meeting from other realities and other places. And it's very like, there's a level setting. There's did we cover this? That document can help everybody go. And I think, again, there's this one person, in this case, it was you. When I think about launches, right? The launch manager, they have all these pieces in their head. And so there's an assumption then that everyone else they're talking also understands all these pieces. But what's really clear when you show the diagram is nobody's head held all of these pieces. So for them to be able to see the connections and the interconnections helps everybody understand the implications and helps the sales and marketing team realize that this was not easy. It was not an instant, and now we're subscription. But in a way that really helped everyone see the process. And I think often if we are the keeper of the project or the launch in our head, we forget how much we know that others don't know. And providing something like this for people to use as a reference is huge. And I would think one of the things that is difficult about this, that again, your designer background helps with, is often as we uncover the things, we go too deep, right? So we're like, okay, I'm going to put everything in one place. And so then there's like, a giant like encyclopedia of information, which no one can get through. So being able to provide enough of that, but not so much details that that the sort of story is lost in there, I think has to be something that you've really worked on and really help your clients work on, because I could easily see myself would put too much information in this visual diagram, making it lose all sense of visual.
Yeah, you're right, spot on. There's one additional thing is that we, like, even if we think we have everything in our mind, we jump to conclusions which aren't there. So just by expressing it, so the first step is to express just what you have in your mind. And then you see like, oh, there are gaps. Oh, I thought this connects directly to this next step, but there's something missing and it's obvious. To the aspect to, oh, there's just too much information, I'm pretty okay with like having a messiness in there to some degree. And the nice thing is, like, instead of having all this in written documents and being like the huge PRD or everything in Jira tickets, or what we see a lot, is that it's easy to jump between the abstraction level. So it's easy to just like look at, okay, what are the top steps? What are like the big journey arcs? Or, what's this detail and how is it connected? So the zooming in and out is, for visual, really easy. And we do that every day with like using Google Maps or something like that. We look at like our neighborhoods, but at the next time we look at, what's the journey to New York? So it's quite easy to look into these abstractions with like a visual approach.
So I can instantly see how helpful this would be, right? For a variety of projects, right? Just in terms of getting alignment and understanding. But I can also think both myself and listeners going, that's amazing, Christoph. Who will be creating this thing? How do I do that? Right? I mean, if I'm not a designer, that's not how my mind necessarily works. Walk us through this.
Yeah. So exactly for this problem, I created an approach. I call it the Mapper method.
Okay.
And it's a 6-step approach, which is like iterative. So you do it a couple of times. It's also jumping from back to back. And it's not describing any like certain visual method, but it's more an approach. How do I think about that? And I just described like the first thing to do is like map your own thoughts.
Okay.
So if you're working on a user journey, if you're working for a certain aspect of your product, map the steps out. Just write down the user is doing this, the user is doing that, and so on and so on. Get like out what you already know and find your knowledge gaps and create an overview, and then involve other people. So get other perspectives, because you as a product person or you as a designer, you don't know what the engineering challenges are. You don't know what like other approaches might be. So you have your idea, but there are usually like a couple of different approaches. So the second step is really like involve people, show it to them, and don't be like, oh, that's the truth. And that's like how it is. But it's like, also, we talked about this last time. What did I get wrong? So I just written it down, and you don't have to have like great graphical skills or something like that. Everybody like worked on stickies. Everybody can like put 3 stickies next to each other. So back in the days, like if you're in an office, use stickies on a wall. If you're remote, there are great whiteboarding tools, Miro, Mural, Figma. You know them. You probably have one and use it already. So use this, map your own thoughts, then acknowledge the perspectives from the other persons. And then the third key step is to point out the assumptions. So where are risks? Where are unclear information? Where do you have research more, or where do you have to build a prototype? Things like that. And with that, you can like either it's clear what to do next, or you go into an assumption mapping technique, or some prioritization technique. It really depends a little bit like on your circumstances. But with that, you can then easily like go to the 4th step, which is plan and act. And plan and act doesn't mean write a project plan and ask a couple of people for budget. Not just like what's the next sensible action. So you have a couple of risks, you have a couple of assumptions. What's the biggest thing you have to find out now to evolve one step further? And with that, you evaluate and you reflect. So these are the 6 steps. It's pretty straightforward. It's like along what classical product development is. You put up assumptions and risks. You find out like how to de-risk them with a prototype, with an interview, with an A/B test. Really depends on where you are in your journey. And then you look like, okay, what do I have? What did I learn here? And then improve your map, go back, rinse and repeat.
What I think is so great about this too, like, I mean, it, like you said, it seems very straightforward, but too often as product people, we try to do, steps 1 through 3 by ourselves, right? We're going to go and we're going to map things and we're going to find the risks. And then we're going to go and get the answers to those risks. So we feel super comfortable that they're no longer risks, or that we found things, or they are risks. And we're going to come back and say, this is a risk, and so it won't work, right? But we've missed all those other perspectives, right? So yes, start with what you know, because you know a lot, but then bringing those perspectives in helps everybody. Just by having those other perspectives in, you've sort of jointly determined risks, and it is where those things are different, or where someone questions one spot or the other is where maybe you have assumptions, and maybe those are the pieces. And doing that up front makes the whole process smoother, but also is where you get that alignment.
Yeah. And the nice thing is, if you visualize that, you point out where there is disagreement, because it's good to have disagreement.
Absolutely.
Because you want to look for these different perspectives. And then you can be like, okay, we have like a disagreement about the thing, and not about like within each other. Because that's another thing. Usually what's happened a lot is a meeting, you have then like this, you said, I said, and we don't get to a common ground, and we have like a misunderstanding. It's just like, okay, we have like this thing, and you think it's like that, and I think it's like that. Let's find out.
Right. Let's just, that means we don't know for sure, and let's go find out. But you're right. Like that, exactly. There's also then the lack of the emotional piece of it. And another thing about documenting it is, right, like, look, yes, people forget things and all of that happens. But when we have a document and we can just go back to it, it's helpful for everyone versus see, you didn't remember, right? Like that got you isn't helping anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And you oftentimes like are midway into a process and you find out you need help from somebody else. And then you sitting down for 5 hours and explain them all what happened. That's like a waste of time. No, but here you can show them like, okay, that's the current state of our discussion. Can you help us like find out what we are missing? We think you should chip in this area. Do we even talk to the right person right now?
Right.
Is it like are you responsible for this, or are we just thinking you're responsible for this?
There's also a level of confidence that we're building in our partners here, right? Like everybody wants the product, the launch to go well, right? But everybody has questions and concerns. And if they can see that sort of level of alignment and due diligence and partnering through it, that's helpful. Then they're like excited to bring the missing piece. But when every one of our partners also has too much on their plate, right? There is a level of crud, Christoph is bringing another project. I don't have any more bandwidth, right? And so that's another sort of trust building piece that we do by having sort of all of these pieces out there.
Yeah, exactly. And you have like this constant reminder, you created the thing together. So everybody is like seeing the thing again, like even after 3 weeks. And it's like, yeah, I remember we talked about this thing. What's like the latest state?
And I imagine it's particularly useful, like the kind of example you were talking about. But when you're talking big enterprise projects or big company-wide initiatives, it is not a one product team project, right?
No.
And very few things are, right? There's pieces and everything fits together when we talk about the sort of technology we all work on. And so again, another reason for mapping those interactions and pieces so that the implications, good and bad, of what one piece is doing is more clearly seen.
Yeah. And you often don't know, like in this bigger projects, you often don't know what and who is involved. So I worked for some time with a medical company with their content team. And we worked on the tooling. So as a product team, we worked on their tooling, an internal product. And in the beginning, it was like, we just have to improve the tooling. And what I did was mapping out what the content team is doing. So what is their real like workday looking like? What all the different tasks they have. And we found out like they're wasting their most time on supporting sales. So it wasn't even like about their real core job. It was a side distraction. And we built out a tools for sales in the end. So a completely different finding, but just by seeing this process and looking around, and it's like, who is involved in there? And we found out like, okay, there's like this thing when they're creating demos for the sales team where they had to like create extra demo machine and feed all the content in this. And it was like a huge time waste. But just by finding this, going through this customer journey or user journey for them was like opening up new perspectives.
That's awesome. What else have you seen? I think the sort of visual mapping tool is key and obviously super powerful. What else do you see as that helps kind of the companies you work with get alignment?
Yeah, so it's often around, of course, having a clearer strategy. So having a clearer idea what you want to do and what you want to achieve. Because we often talk in features. We often talk we just have to build this, especially on a team level. We often have like this, do that. And then backtracking to what people actually want to achieve is one way to do this. I just published these days an article about impact mapping and how to reverse this. So in classical impact mapping, you go from a business outcome to like, for whom is this business outcome and what is their behavior change, and then you go to the feature. In reality, this is often not the case. It's often, when I work with teams, it's often not that they get directed by outcomes, they get feature requests. I think that's unfortunately often the reality. And what I'm doing there is I use the impact map to reverse the conversation, to be, okay, you want to get this feature, how do you imagine somebody is using this? And you talk suddenly about the actor, you talk suddenly about like what the behavior change for the people is, what do they want to achieve. And then you can contrast this with a business impact. And again, by making this expressive through a visual, you can start then to explore options. You can then start to go into different directions and can also really see if somebody's disagreeing. If you write it down, then it's hard that somebody is not saying like, yeah, but I don't believe this, or I think you got this wrong. So this helps. And instead of like going into a written narrative, which I also love, so I love like PR FAQs and things like that, but a lot of cultures are not ready for it. A lot of cultures are like, nobody is reading this. It's like getting, usually nobody has time for that. So a map is like, you can just bind this into your conversation. You can have like your regular meetings and screen share or point to the wall and go like, okay, did I understand you right? Did I get this right? What do we have to change that it feels correct?
Yeah. No, and I like that. And I like the idea of the impact mapping, right? Because you're right. Most requests come in as feature requests. As much as we are like, don't focus on that, focus on the problem we're solving. But you're going to have to backwards engineer that. And that's both with customers and with our internal parties who are bringing in requests, exactly. Right? And so being able to manage that conversation in terms of going backwards, but also record it, right? Again, and so what will often happen is somebody gets a feature, we have a conversation, I go, oh, okay, I get it. And I put a one sentence out that signifies that problem to me, right? But that one sentence and their feature request, I have not mapped any of the parts in between out. I just recorded the answer, which as particularly as time goes by, as other pieces come in, other people start to play with this, they didn't have that, right? And again, that map that you create allows everybody to go, oh, we started here and then we did this and this and this and this. Okay, it's a quick way to follow along without having to, here, go listen to the 12 conversations we had.
Exactly. It's a little bit like your context backpack. So you have your context always with you and you can just like bring it up. And you don't have to try to talk somebody through it completely without any references, but you can really bring them on the same page and can also like encourage asking questions. I think that's happening way too less, that people trying to convince. That's a little bit like also how we act with PowerPoints and presentation style meetings. We try to convince people, but in most cases when we work on something, we don't try to convince people. We try to align people and get them on the same page. And by getting their perspectives, by getting like, where do we miss something or where is a disagreement which we have to explore deeper.
It's such a good point. So the PowerPoint thing comes up a lot. So I am a marketer by trade. That's what my background's in. So I, like PowerPoint's just like a native language. So I will create a PowerPoint in my mind as just like a wireframe for the discussion. That's all I mean it as, right? But it feels so done to the recipient, right? Yeah. That no matter how many times I give like the explicit, like, no, 100% not done, just for fodder for conversation. It doesn't read that way. And I think that's one of the things when you think about like the visual maps and some of those pieces, when they have that sketch feeling, right? Or when it's the Post-it notes, it just signals differently. It doesn't matter your intent, as weird as that sounds. Like my intent is for this to feel the same way. And it's just a tool I'm very comfortable with. So it didn't take me any time to make, right? But it takes other people lots of time to make a PowerPoint. And so for them, it just feels like, well, it's baked now, right? Where do I contribute?
Yeah. And you can't change a PowerPoint mid-presentation.
Right. That's true.
Like, it's annoying.
Yeah.
And if you have like a sticky on a wall or a virtual whiteboard, like, yeah, everybody can just go there, rip this to pieces and be Like, no, that's like, we have to change
a Miro board I can just
And
drop a
it's like-
post-it note on or a comment on. It is just, again, it's the sort of like your native tool. So for me, it takes me longer to do a Miro board than it does a PowerPoint. I am not the normal person, I understand. But it really is, it is part of that signal of this is a place we're looking for everybody to contribute.
Yeah, and I encourage really people to keep their things scrappy. Never go into a mode where you're like, now I'm opening Figma and make it pretty and make it stable and like send my designer like away for 2 weeks to make this awesome journey map. That's like, there are certain cases where this is helpful. Yes, if you have a stable map and if you have something which should last over time, but most of our things are not this way. They're changing, they're moldable. We want to change them like every delivery we do. We want to change our experience. So keep them scrappy.
Yeah, keep them scrappy. I like it. All right. We talked about lots of different things. But before we get to my final question, everyone here will be like, I know what she's going to ask. But you do work with a lot of different types and sizes and stages of companies. And we talked about some common themes for sure. Are there anything else that you think, oh man, if I could just get the companies I work with, like this is the number one thing you want them to understand as you work with them?
That's like, there are a lot of things, of course. But in the end, it's oftentimes about communicating better and doing less. And not doing less by like sitting around more on the beach, but doing less by creating a smaller experiment, creating a smaller step, and not trying to deliver like everything in one part, but really finding what's our like biggest hurdle right now, or question right now, or assumption right now, and what can we do to dismantle this instead of overcommitting to a big plan. So I think that's pretty powerful. So maybe we just have to talk to 5 people, to 5 customers, to be sure like, okay, that's something they really are interested in, or this is really their problem, or I just thought that this is their problem and there's something else hidden in there. I think that's for me like where I'm aiming for.
And I think too often we make our projects so big from the start, right? Versus like, this is the direction, this is what we think, and we're going to take steps along the way. Yeah. And we also think that when we're doing validation, it has to be 1 million interviews in 4 months, right? And so then we go, we don't have time for that. And we move on. And that making it more adaptive, more agile, I think is really key.
Yeah, exactly. And just often go out, talk to some people, or show them a map. It works also with your customer, especially in B2B. If you have like some trustful partners, you can just like, we thought this, the feature we talked about will work like this. Does this work with your workflow?
Yeah. Is that how you
can
flow?
We map your workflow next to it? I also did that with like often with customers. So if you're in B2B and they have like complex workflows, map their workflow. What are they doing? When are they opening Excel, and when are they like import your data where you should now get like this crazy new connection feature? Maybe it's just a better Excel template and it's already a good step forward for them, instead of heading into a 6 months, we have to do a data pipeline project.
Right, yeah. A huge partnership that we're going to do. Yeah. All right. So that's the organization perspective. So then we're going to bring it to the final question, right? If you were going to have our listeners themselves do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
The first thing is start mapping. It's really easy, but it's of course, as everything, you get better while doing it. So next time you take notes, try to put it on a couple of sticky notes and order them. That's the first thing. The second thing is ask for feedback. Don't go into the conversations and try to convince people. Like, be really like, I'm not totally sure. Can you help me? Instead of, I did this and please, please, please believe me that everything is right. But like, ask for the disagreement, because if you find it out today, it won't like hunt you in 3 months.
Yeah. And you'll have partners who are more bought in because they know you've already done some of that poking that they would do.
Exactly.
So super helpful, Christoph. Okay. If people wanted to learn more about you and from you, where should I send them?
Send them to my LinkedIn. So my name is quite unique, luckily. So if you Google it, you find my LinkedIn or my website. And then feel free to poke me and ask for the Mapper guide. I'm currently working on a guide. So I talked about the method. It's pretty new how I put it together. So I'm still working on like the guide, but I have a preview right now ready.
Awesome.
And I'm happy to share this preview for free for everybody who is like interested in diving into this deeper.
So Christoph Steinlehner. See, there's only one Rebecca Kalogeris. So we get it easy on those places. No one can spell it, but you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Excellent. And we will put links in the show notes as well. So Christoph, thank you for coming on. And this was a wonderful conversation and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure to be here. And maybe until next time.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.